The JasperFx team have been working on CritterWatch. CritterWatch will be an enterprise-level monitoring tool. Using some of the testing code created for that project, Jeremy stopped by to show me some of the details of the Stateful Resource Model, which is a huge benefit for developer experience and reliability.
Yeah, so like you and I were talking off camera, working this week, getting to work on what will be a tool called CritterWatch. That's hopefully going to be our commercial tool to help monitor Wolverine and Martin and whatever future critters exist to monitor these applications in real life. Um, so to be able to do that and even to develop it, I need some sample applications that are sending messages back and forth to each other with some expected failures. And so I can rev up, I can see messages hitting a dead letter queue. So that just, I think, happens to lead to what's hopefully going to be a good example for our video today. So working on these three little systems that are showing up here in the inevitable Excalibur drawing. Um, all three of these are headless services, headless console apps. Trip Publisher is constantly building a bunch of fake trips, tagging it of when do we depart, arriving, marking travel. Trip Service is recording, what's happening. It's creating Martin event streams to track the activity. And every so often, with a little bit of randomness, the big road trip you're taking, you may experience some kind of critical breakdown, which is going to send messages to the repair shop here.
Yeah.
And all of this, all three services are talking kind of between themselves with RabbitMQ using Wolverine asynchronous messaging.
Right. Yeah, this will be a great follow-on, I think, from our last video, because there we talked about, if this is headless, I guess what we did there was kind of headed in that it was for an API, and this is an area that I've only explored a little bit, so I'm looking forward to seeing this. The RabbitMQ thing there obviously is just a placeholder for any of the supported transports you guys use, right?
Yes, yes, which I'm using. So at this point, Wolverine supporting RabbitMQ, of course. It has a built-in TCP socket-based approach. I probably wouldn't use in production, but it works. Azure Service Bus, AWS SQS, GCP PubSub, Kafka, and Pulsar so far.
Fantastic. Very good.
We're going to use RabbitMQ today because, as some of you probably know, RabbitMQ is Docker friendly. It has a fantastic local development story, and it's just easy to use.
Yeah, it's a great piece of software too.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
So the first bit of emphasis I want to throw on is, as we can see in this drawing, for these services to work in real life, Martin's talking to a Postgres database. Wolverine itself is going to be doing message storage. So using the same database for transactional inbox and outbox support, but also Wolverine has a model for database-backed dead letter queuing.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really hoping to be working with this week and next week. So, Trip Service needs to know that, but at the same time, it needs to have tables here, and it also needs to have objects built in RabbitMQ itself. So
It's quite a bit of setup.
yeah, and of course, to be productive, as developers, really want to be able. And any team member, you want a new team member to start with you to be able to do a clean clone of your database or clean clone of your code base, and as fast as possible. How quickly can you get them to be able to run integration tests or be able to launch the application on your box? So hopefully it's not much more than run one script that maybe runs a bunch of Docker containers. We're going to do it with Docker Compose today, but it could be Aspire, it could be who knows what. Run a Docker Compose and start the application up. Wolverine and Martin both have something something just for lack of originality, I call the Stateful Resource Model, where they are able to kind of look at the raw database and even RabbitMQ and say, hey, these are the things I need. Can you go make sure that they exist?
Hmm.
Yeah, or at least in development mode.
Yeah.
So let me start flipping to some code. Let's make this a little bit concrete. All right. So taking the very simplest of these three services, the repair shop. Repair shop, it's really only going to have a handful of message handlers. It's so small, I'm just putting in one program file. So we got a handler where it can handle a repair requested message of, hey, I have this trip ID and I'm in this state. Can you please go fix me?
Hmm.
And folks, kind of keep in mind, this is all faked up. This is not a real system. Uh, and smaller off to the side, it has an internal message handler, conduct repairs handler, that handles a message called conduct repairs that it's sending to itself.
Gotcha.
So let me show you the application itself. That is what we are looking at right here. So working with a headless service this time, we can just use host.create default builder, or I'm not really using iConfiguration just to make sure everybody knows to do. You can use this too. Um, if you are building a headless service and you want to take advantage of iConfiguration really fast, using Create Application Builder is probably better for that because it gives you instant
Uh,
access to iConfiguration.
gotcha.
But I didn't care about that because I'm feeding in the database connection string. So I'm just using host create default builder.
Very good.
I'm going to say use Wolverine. And inside of the use Wolverine, I can actually configure services. So that's what you see here. Um, I had to, unfortunately, I had to help Wolverine a little bit just to say, hey, this is the main application because it was getting fooled. That's a bug that'll hopefully be fixed before you watch this video. Uh, these are really just some development time switches to try to make it start up faster. This is eliminating some noise.
Hmm.
The two big important ones that are the important things here. We're going to use RabbitMQ. So this is going to connect, use RabbitMQ. This is just saying I want to connect to RabbitMQ with a locally running RabbitMQ with no security.
Hmm.
So obviously, you're going to throw a connection string in here if this is real world usage. The cool one here that I want to call out because we're using this quite heavily in testing. Um, So this thing called use conventional routing for RabbitMQ. So what this is going to do, and if you've already used mass transit or in service bus, this is all very familiar to you. This is automatic routing. So we're going to say that all messages we're going to listen to for every message that we know we handled, like this guy down here, repair requested. We're going to expect a RabbitMQ queue that's named after the full name, the .NET full name of this guy right here.
Hmm.
Likewise, any message that we send out, we're going to assume that a RabbitMQ exchange exists with that name.
Gotcha.
So, um, so right off the bat, in order for this application to work, it needs those queues and exchanges need to exist. Coming back down, we do have a point. We're getting there. Also setting up Martin, connect to this database. A little bit of this is what my schema name's going to be, and this integrate with Wolverine. That's adding. Doo, 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 doo. That's going to add Wolverine message storage to this database. So that's going to include the dead letter queuing that we're going to talk about in a little bit, and a few other things.
Yeah, I think we hit
This
on
one,
that. We hit on that a bit in the last video. That blows my mind. That's fantastic.
yeah. So over the years, we've tried really hard to make this kind of getting started story as easy as possible
Yeah.
because if it's hard to use, nobody will try to use it. This guy here might be a little bit unnecessary, but I'm still doing it. So on application startup, and this is something you probably want in development and maybe testing time. Maybe you don't use it in production, but for a good development experience, on application startup, Wolverine is going to look at what are all of the resources that we need to exist. What are the RabbitMQ queues, exchanges, database tables, Martin event tables, whatnot, and just make sure they're all set up ahead of time,
Hmm.
on application startup. So our applications here, they all have similar setup. They're all using that same kind of resource setup. Trip service has a lot more handlers, but same thing applies. It's using the RabbitMQ, the automatic routing, all based on naming conventions. Um, so let's get an application started. First thing I'm going to do, let me try to make this a little bit bigger. Um, if you squint really hard, well, the command I just ran, this is stopping all the Docker containers for this series of applications, and it's restarting. So effectively, what I'm doing is starting from a blank RabbitMQ broker and a blank Postgres database. And now
Beautiful.
we're going to wait a second because none of this stuff is completely synchronous. So we're going to talk a little bit to make sure RabbitMQ is really, really, really actually ready. And now we're probably good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to run first. I'm going to run the repair shop,
Can you increase that
and
font a little bit too?
yeah,
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good.
and there's a tremendous amount of overhead popping up here. As you can see, one of the things it's doing is it's declaring a whole bunch of RabbitMQ exchanges, queues, and bindings based on these are the messages I have, I
Hmm.
know about. These objects must exist somewhere, and they don't right now. So I'm going to just make sure they exist.
Right.
And then also from having the Martin stuff, and I'm sorry, folks, this is ugly code here, but this stuff all means something because this database has never been touched before. Martin's also starting up and saying, "Hey, there's a lot of Martin specific functions that I require and tables, and they don't." Excuse me, they don't exist yet, so I'm just going to make them. And you're
Hmm.
seeing a copious amount of console setup going on. These are all the things that Martin is quietly setting up. And somewhere in here, this is also setting up the Wolverine message storage. Point is, at the end of this repair shop is completely ready to go. Everything it needs is set up.
Love
Um,
it.
Likewise, we'll do the same thing. I won't make the font bigger as this runs. I'm going to do the same thing for this trip service. Do, do, do. And it's doing the same kind of thing. It's, reaching in there and making sure the Rabbit stuff exists, the database tables exist, or if they don't exist, it's just going to create them. And
Love it.
lastly, finally, we're going to do the same thing with Trip Publisher, but this one actually jumped. Make sure it doesn't run. This one is kind of running on a kind of an infinite loop, and it's pumping messages to the other services, which is all you're seeing. It's not very interesting. It's just saying, "Hey, I processed this message.
Hmm.
Come over here, trip service." You can see it's doing things. That exception you're seeing there, that's actually kind of on purpose. It's purposely set up to occasionally throw exceptions.
You can
And
do
then
that.
what's that?
I do that, but not intentionally. So
So get into that, and I might not have the randomness quite random enough, but occasionally it will send messages to repair shop. Um, so let me show you the chaos monkey so you can make fun of it, Jeffrey. Um, yeah.
Ah,
so
there we go. Yeah.
so need to. I'm purposely trying to simulate system that's encountering a mix of transient errors or maybe more permanent errors, uh,
Right.
and so I can simulate things either being retried or moved to an error queue. Because we're going to work with the management console that's going to help you replay here in a minute. So the super crude, and that's not right. So the world's crudest possible chaos monkey. It's a little bit of kind of built-in middleware on our Wolverine app. That's just once in a while, probably about a little bit less than 5% of the time, we're going to throw this repair shop too busy exception
Yeah.
just to see how the system does handling errors.
Right. So this is all created, just to be clear, for the CritterWatch, which is the tool that people will be able to, subscribe to, use, and it will surface this information. So you're doing it intentionally here. We're not trying to show a good practice of randomly throwing exceptions. Yeah, cool. Very good.
So let me just a little bit more here on the Stateful Resource Model. Let me stop all these things. Clear this out. So in the last episode, we talked a little bit about some of the command line extensions for the CritterStack. Whatever reason, a lot of us kind of like the idea of command line tools for a lot of utilities, development time tools, diagnostics. It's so vastly cheaper than building a UI screen that we lean pretty heavily into this in the critter world.
Yeah.
The resources command. So all that stuff I was doing is just a generic way to go set up all the resources. We got a few more options here at the command line, which I honestly don't remember exactly what we have. So let's see the help.
Nice.
Okay. So just thinking in a generic way, and this will also work for if you're using Azure Service Bus, assuming that your application has permissions to create objects or AWS, SQS, Kafka, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this kind of generic stateful resource model we've built in the CritterStack and Martin, Wolverine both. We can do things. We can say, I want to make sure that all these resources are set up.
Right.
So from a development time, that I made a clean clone of the application. I want to make sure that all the resources, the message broker, the Kafka topics, whatever, it's just created for us on the fly. It's we've now seeded our local development environment. We're ready to go.
Right. Does that I mean, it seems to me that's a would be a good thing to do if you have like a deployment pipeline, before you do the deployment, to make sure whatever the environment this is being sent into matches what you think it should be. Is that right?
Possibly yes.
Yeah.
One of the other things that the command line will do. So we don't necessarily assume that every shop is going to want to use this to do the actual setups.
Mm-hmm.
A good DevOps team is probably not going to allow that. But one thing it can definitely do is what I kind of grew up calling an environment check. One of the options of this command line is check.
Mm-hmm.
So it can do kind of a little bit of a testing of, hey, I'm supposed to have this database. Can I touch it?
Yeah.
This database.
Hey, I think that's what I was asking. I wasn't, trying to say it would should set it all up in the pipeline, but make sure, verify that it's ready to go. So beautiful. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt there, Jeremy.
No, no,
Yeah.
no. And I would have to go look at my own documentation I wrote about 5 years ago, but it is possible to do these kind of checks on application startup. But exactly like you said, being able to do like a fail fast when you do automatic deployments of
Yeah.
kind of reaching out of can it touch the database, do files exist,
Mm-hmm.
so forth. To show Jeffrey and I's age, because you're going to remember this one. Do you remember when we still depended on a lot of COM objects
Oh yeah.
in the environment? So I think I learned about this technique. I worked at ThoughtWorks very briefly in the very early 2000s. And I know folks were talking about this there. But right around '05, I was helping with this big existing application where it depended on COM components being in the GAC,
Mm-hmm.
more bad evil words,
Yep.
and you could never really trust that the environment was any good at all when you deployed.
Yeah.
So we learned about and we built these kind of environmental checks so that when your application started up, the first thing you would make it do is, do I have this? Do I have
Yeah.
that? Do I have that? So that a very early, super crude CD pipeline could detect, fail fast. If nope, the environment's no good,
Right.
back out, maybe put the old code back in.
Love it.
Those words you didn't want to hear again. Com components, GAC.
I actually had a flashback when you said that. I don't know if you remember the briefly there was we had decom, and then they had this experimental decom tunneling through HTTP before the whole web API thing happened.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, sorry, I should put a content warning on the screen for anybody that lived through that stuff. But and then
No.
anyhow, yeah,
On that one, we're going to do just a small digression. We have to. So, old friend of mine told me a story he'd heard secondhand. My cousin's nephew saw Ferris Bueller pass out at the 21 Flavors kind of thing.
yeah,
Um, Consultant was helping a shop build a brand new system back in the decom days, and it was like the last Friday they were going to turn it on that night, so it'd be ready to go over the weekend. Consultant, they did the last minute checks. Everybody's happy. Closed down his laptop and drove home.
yeah,
And when he gets home, he gets a call, the call from his client of, "Hey, the system stopped working after you left. We don't know what's going on. Can we got to figure this out so it can go live on Monday." So the laptop, the guy says, "All right, give me 1 second." So he pulls out his laptop, starts it up. This is the old days, so he had to log into his modem, 56.6 modem, and he's still on the phone with the client. The client says, "Hey, it started working again, but it's really, really slow."
I know what's going on already.
So, yeah, as Jeffrey and I both.
Location transparency was the dream, right? Like you don't need to know where your stuff's running. It's beautiful. No problem with that.
Oh God,
It was running on his laptop, right?
yes, it was. So, folks, if you never had to use DCOM, just count yourself lucky. All right. Um, so that was the stateful resource model. This is all about trying to make Martin and Wolverine easier to pick up and go, and then just for your team to be able to be productive over time.
Hmm.
Switch code bases, start a new Docker container. Martin especially can put the database exactly the way it needs and just go.
Hmm.
Wolverine can do the same thing. It's mostly the same code. We extended that to Wolverine to be able to handle RabbitMQ, Azure Service Bus, really anything we connect to.
Super cool.
Yeah. Now, somebody's going to ask, how will this work with Project Aspire or Aspire.net, whatever it's called these days? And on that note, let's switch to our next topic.
All right.